The Eagles kick off their season tomorrow in Detroit. I'll preview their opening matchup against the Lions. Also, the MLB announces new rule changes for the 2023 season. How will they affect the Phillies as well as the rest of the league? This episode of the Philly Sports Spot YouTube channel starts right now. What's going on, everybody, and welcome into this edition of the Philly Sports Spot YouTube channel. I am your host, Jordan Hirsch, and now, guys, before we get into this video, please make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel with notifications turned on so you never miss another upload. You could also follow me on Instagram. The link will be in the description below. Alright, so let's get right into this episode by talking about the Birds. The Eagles kick off their season tomorrow at 1 o'clock on Fox up in Detroit. They're going to take on the Detroit Lions, who they absolutely handled last season, winning 44-6 on Halloween Day. That really kind of kick-started the entire rest of the second half for the Eagles as they ended up making the playoffs. But the Lions are a more improved team this year. They got healthier, of course, over the offseason. They still have some scary weapons on that team, including their second overall pick, Aiden Hutchinson, who the Eagles' offensive line should have their hands full with tomorrow. They also signed DJ Chark earlier this year, so the Eagles are going to have to deal with him at the wide receiver position as well. TJ Hawkinson also on that team, one of the better tight ends, I think, at least in the league. Is just he's kind of stuck in Detroit, so he hasn't really been able to produce as much as maybe he should. Jared Goff, of course, Detroit's quarterback as well. So Lions should be better this year. I don't think they're going to be a 2 or 3 win team. I still think that the Eagles should beat this team. Detroit's secondary is filled with many holes in that secondary. I think the Eagles wide receivers should have an absolute field day against them, which is something that the Eagles really did not have to do last season. They threw the ball only 14 times last year in that 44-6 win. So Miles Sanders and company really just ran all over that team. And speaking of Miles Sanders, him and Jason Kelce both announced this week that they will play in the opener, which means the Eagles have nobody listed on their injury report. Miles Sanders was, of course, dealing with that hamstring injury earlier in the preseason, missed all the preseason games, and did not practice for much of training camp. But he will play. He said he's good to go. Jason Kelce will also continue his 122-game now streak of consecutive starts. He did have that routine elbow surgery on August 9th, but he did announce on 94.1 earlier this week that he is good to go. So very good news for the Eagles that they're going to go into this season completely healthy, and that's going to be a real key for the Eagles this season, I think, is staying healthy, because if they can stay on the field, they do have one of the better rosters in the league. So a couple more news and notes to get to for the Eagles. So Isaac Seumalo had his contract restructured earlier in the week, bringing the Eagles' cap space available to $9.5 million. That sets the Eagles up really nicely for a potential early season move or a move at the trade deadline if they do see an area maybe where they can improve. The Eagles are now set up very well for the trade deadline or potential that early season move. Howie Roseman, of course, continues to work his magic with getting this team not only under the cap, but well under the cap enough that you could go get perhaps a bigger name guy sometime down the road this season. But back to the game tomorrow. I mean, it should be very interesting to see how they run this offense. Of course, the Eagles offense last season, during the second half of the year, they became very heavily reliant on the running game, and it really worked. It helped them, of course, get into the playoffs. Jalen Hurts was a huge part of that. So was Miles Sanders as well. Boston Scott, Kenny Gainwell played their parts, and the Eagles are bringing all those guys back this year, as well as Trey Sermon, who they signed last week. Claimed him off waivers from San Francisco. So it's going to be really interesting to see now, because I think everybody expects this team to be that pass-first offense. Of course, they're going to have one of the better wide receiving cores in the league, I believe. So it's going to be this is a really big year for Jalen Hurts, and it all starts tomorrow. He's not going to be facing the best secondary, so hopefully kind of a little easier way into the season for him. It's a prove-it year for Jalen Hurts. There's no excuses anymore. He has great wide receivers. This offense is going to be tailored, at least to start the season, to the passing game, and he's going to have a lot to prove this year. There are going to be a lot of good quarterbacks coming out of college next season, and if Jalen Hurts cannot prove himself, I'm sure Howie Roseman will not be reluctant to pull the trigger on a potential quarterback in the first round of this draft. So I mean, I like Jalen Hurts. I think everybody here is kind of rooting for Jalen Hurts. Of course, there are a lot of people out there that don't like him, a lot of people out there that think he's the future. I'm still pretty undecided on that. I think this year will be that telltale year for him, just to see if he could lock down that starting role. I mean, even listening to some of the analysts on like NFL Network earlier this week, they're not really sure, and I think they're kind of just going to use this season, especially the early part of the season, to gauge where he's at. And he has a huge opportunity ahead of him. The Eagles' schedule this season does not start out that hard, so it is going to be more of an easier way in. I honestly think the Eagles are going to win their first 4 games this season. So, of course, a big opportunity for Jalen Hurts to go out there and prove himself and show that he is the quarterback of the future in Philadelphia. Alright, and finally, regarding the Eagles, I do have a score prediction for this game. Like I said, I think the Eagles win their first 4 games this season, and I think they win this one by a final score of 31-23. I think 4 touchdowns from the Eagles. I'll go 3 passing touchdowns for Jalen Hurts. I think Miles Sanders gets maybe a rush in there. Maybe even Jalen Hurts gets one on the rush. I think the Eagles will come up with some big defensive plays. I do think it's going to be a close game going into the fourth quarter, but I think it's really going to ultimately come down to the Eagles' defense making some stops late in the game and sealing this win. So again, 31-23, Eagles is my score prediction for Week 1. So moving on to the world of baseball now, where yesterday the MLB announced a series of rule changes for the 2023 season, including a pitch clock, larger bases, and a limit on defensive shifts. I'm a fan of 2 out of 3 of these new changes. I really do like the pitch clock. I really think it's going to help speed up the game. It speeds the game up in the minor leagues, they said, by 26 minutes, which is a significant improvement. And I think Major League Baseball could really benefit from that. I also like the limit on defensive shifts. I think it really puts more of a focus on offense, and I think it's really going to help a lot of people kind of come into the game because fans want to see offense. Fans pay to go see offense, and that's how you really attract new fans too, which is something that baseball really, I think, needs to focus on. The one that I don't like, though, is the larger bases, which is going to create a 4 1/2 inch reduction in between first and second and third. I understand that it's really for preventing injuries, especially at first base, since the runner's going to have now more of a lane and more space to hit that base, where he's not kind of right on top of the first baseman receiving the ball. So I understand that, but it does make it so it's no longer 90 feet in between first and second and third, which is kind of something that baseball is really built around. So I'm not really too big of a fan of that. That will encourage stolen bases, however. I'm really excited to see just how stolen bases do increase next season in baseball, and especially for the Phillies too, because the Phillies, they've ran all over teams this season. They are one of the top teams in stolen bases, so I'm interested to see how many stolen bases we're going to end up with next year. I do think it's really going to be a luxury that we do have the best catcher in baseball in JT Realmuto behind home plate, because teams are going to be running more, and I think JT is going to give the Phillies more of a chance to get some outs there, where other teams may not have that luxury. So just moving on to some of these other rule changes now. So the pitch clock. So you're going to have 15 seconds to throw the pitch in between pitches with no runners on, 20 seconds if there is a runner on base, and 30 seconds between batters. I think this is really going to affect the hitters more, honestly. The hitters must be ready to face a pitch by the 8-second mark, which means with no runners on, they will only have 7 seconds. That improves to 12 seconds with the runner on to either step out of the box or do their little pre-pitch rituals that some hitters have. Bryce Harper, of course, he'll tap the home plate a few times, so he's going to have to maybe quicken that up a little bit. He's going to be one of those players that's not really going to be able to step out. Hitters will get 1 timeout per at-bat. And then another rule, kind of regarding the whole pitch clock thing, is that you're only going to get 2 pickoff attempts. So if there's a runner on first, you're only allowed to throw over twice or step off the mound twice. You are allowed a third one as long as it's successful. So basically, that's really just to prohibit. So once you've used those 2 pickoff attempts, the runner can't just run whenever he wants, because you can then throw over again as long as it's successful. And back regarding that pitch clock, so if the batter is not ready by the allotted time frame, he will be charged with a strike. If the pitcher does not release or does not begin his windup by the time the pitch clock runs out, he will be charged with an automatic ball. It's going to be really interesting to see who's the first umpire to call this. I'm sure there are going to be umpires calling this in spring training, really, to kind of break that ice. but I think somebody's going to have to do it on either opening day or sometime early in the season, because I don't think any umpire really is going to want to be the first one to do it. But once somebody does make that first call, it's really going to open the floodgates, I think, and I think it's just going to become kind of something that we all are going to have to deal with next season. I mean, I kind of liken it back to last year when they implemented the umpires kind of had to like rub down the pitcher's hands just to make sure there's no illegal substances on it. We thought, oh, that's such a huge change. I mean, like, look at this, and now you kind of really never even notice it this year. It's really just something you don't even pick up on. I think it's going to be something with the pitch clock as well as some of the other rules for this upcoming season. I think it's kind of going to be something you notice for the first part of the season, but after that, I think it's just going to become second nature. It's going to take adjustments for a lot of these guys, but again, I do think that once they do get settled in, maybe after the first month or so of the season, because they will have spring training as well, to kind of learn all these new rules and learn how to play with them, I think that they're all really going to be fans of it, because it does encourage that offense, and I think it's going to keep more guys on the field. Alright, and so of course the last rule change that was announced yesterday is the limit on defensive shifts, where the infielders must have both of their feet on the infield dirt before the pitcher releases the ball. Then they could back up if they choose to. Once the pitcher does release that ball, but they must have both of their feet on the infield dirt up until that point. You also are not going to be allowed to switch sides of the field. So, for example, the shortstop and third baseman are not going to be able to move to the left of second base, and the first baseman and the second baseman are not going to be able to move to the right of second base. I think Alec Boehm is really going to enjoy this, considering the fact he always has to jog all the way across the field whenever there's a lefty up, because the Phillies like putting him in shallow right field. So I'm sure he'll be a fan of this rule, and I think a lot of people are going to be a fan of this rule. It's going to stop all those annoying line drives and ground balls that off the bat you think, oh, that's an automatic single or even more, and then of course there's a fielder right there to make the catcher just easily field the ball and throw the runner out at first. So I do think that's going to be something that fans really do enjoy. I do think that I'm going to like this rule as well, especially once we see it on the field, because it is going to have more offense. I think it's really going to help guys. A lot of these lefties, especially like Kyle Schwarber and Bryce Harper, that always get shifted on in those deep, with those second basemen or even third basemen out in shallow right field. So I think it's going to help improve their offense, which doesn't really even need much improvement. So it's really going to be exciting to see them now be able to play with no shift on. And if a team does violate this shift rule, the opposing team will have the choice of either having an automatic ball for the batter, or they can choose the result of the play. So the call will not be made until after the play is over. So if, for example, the other team does not follow the new shift rule, but the hitter still gets a single or a double, any hit anyways, that team can still choose to leave that hit in place. Alright, so back to the present now with the Phillies. As we're going to get started here with the Phillies week in review. The Phillies went 3-3 this week. Overall, not that bad, especially considering how this week started. I do think this week did highlight the fact that the Phillies really do need Sir Anthony Dominguez back at the back end of this bullpen. David Robertson really did struggle. He blew a save, of course, on Thursday, then gave up the walk-off home run in San Francisco on Sunday. I do think a lot of this is from him being overworked, but I also do think he could benefit from maybe not being in that closed role. Phillies did announce Dominguez is going to come back on Sunday. Wheeler and Eflin are both nearing returns, and hopefully Castellanos can get back here on Tuesday, which is the first day he's eligible to come off that 10-day IL with the oblique strain. But anyways, for the Phillies week in review, they did lose the first two games this week on Saturday and Sunday in San Francisco, losing 5-4 Saturday, 5-3 on that walk-off on Sunday. They were then off Monday and bounced back Tuesday and Wednesday, collecting a couple of one-run wins against the Miami Marlins, 3-2 and 4-3. Phillies then looked like they were going to sweep out the Marlins on Thursday. They really beat up Sandy Alcantara. However, David Robertson could not hold on to that lead. The 5-4 lead in the ninth inning. Phillies end up losing that game 6-5, but get a good bounce-back win yesterday against Patrick Corbin and the Nationals. Phillies win that game 5-3. And so looking ahead to their upcoming week, they're going to finish off the series against the Nationals today and tomorrow. Tonight's game is at 6:05, and tomorrow's game is at 1:05, both on NBC Sports Philadelphia. They will then be off Monday as they travel to Miami to face the Marlins again. All these games are at 6:40 Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Thursday is also Roberto Clemente Day, and all these games will be on NBC Sports Philly. And the Phillies will head to Atlanta for a big series against the Braves. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Friday and Saturday's game both at 7:20. Friday, NBC Sports Philadelphia. Saturday, NBC 10. And then Sunday's game will be at 1:35 back on NBC Sports Philadelphia. So big week of divisional matchups for the Phillies coming up this week. And finally, one more thing to get to this week, and it's that the Sixers made a move signing free agent power forward / center Montrezl Harrell to a 2-year deal with a player option for that second year. It's also a vet min. I think this is a really good move for the Sixers. Montrezl Harrell is really going to bring some much needed scoring off the bench. He also should be a pretty good backup to Joel Embiid. And he is going to bring a lot of energy, as we've seen. Him and Embiid, of course, have gotten into it a few times, but I don't really think that's going to be a problem. Of course, Embiid and Andre Drummond got into it quite a bit while they were on separate teams, but we saw how that worked out for the first half of last season. So I don't think that him and Harrell's little quarrels earlier in their careers should be any problems or hindrance this season. And I think that Montrezl Harrell is going to be a pretty good backup for Embiid. And finally, as long as he picks up that player option, he could be back there behind him for 2 years, which will be the first time that Joel Embiid has a backup that's on more than a 1-year deal. So I think a pretty good move all in all for the Sixers. Some more energy, some more offense, and really a pretty good defender as well. Harrell is more undersized, so he's not going to get all those block numbers, but he can guard the forward position as well. As the Sixers, their rotation now looking pretty set this year with that signing. And yeah, I think that Montrezl Harrell's really going to fit right in the city. Alright, that is going to wrap things up for this edition of the Philly Sports Spot YouTube channel. Again, make sure you guys like this video and subscribe to my channel with notifications turned on so you never miss another upload. I post every Saturday. You could also follow me on Instagram. The link will be in the description below. Or you could just look me up. It's at Philly Sports Spot. That's PhillySportSpot. So just one S between sport and spot. And until next week, guys, let's go Birds. Let's get a win on Sunday.